Edith Marshall went on a trip to the Bahamas for her 75th birthday. Even her ticket was for a luxury suite. She was an older woman with no stuff and very simple clothes. When a millionaire made fun of her in front of the other people on the ship, she told everyone what she was doing there and who her son was, leaving people speechless. A vacation was something Miss Marshall had never done before. Even though she had lived in Florida, a state known for its beaches, it had been years since she had been to the coast. In recent years, life had become harder for her because of her financial situation and her retirement. This made it hard for her to enjoy things as much. She did her own taxes and took care of her house, which took up all of her money. But on this day, she turned 75 and went on a cruise to the Bahamas. It turned out this trip wasn't like any other. It was a high-end ship with pools, gambling, suites, and excellent food. A place where only very wealthy people go. This was not a place for people like Edith. Edith would be going to such a place for the first time in her life. She had only seen it on TV and the internet, so she had no idea what would happen. But she had no doubts. When she got out of the cab at the Miami port, she didn't know what to do. She looked around for signs or workers who could help her, but all she could see were happy, well-dressed people with family or friends. They all seemed to know exactly where they were going, as if getting on a luxury cruise was something they did every day. But neither her age, nor the fact that she was on her own was going to stop her. Even though being there may have been scary, it was also a big personal accomplishment for her. She would be leaving the country for the first time, and going on that particular luxury cruise was something she had been waiting for so long. When the bell went off, people lined up to get on the cruise. Miss Marshall didn't know what the difference was between the long and short lines, so she joined the one that was near for her. She struggled hard to move her bags forward with each step. No one was willing to help the older woman, who was also the only one who wasn't dressed up. She thought she might meet new people, but no one seemed interested in talking to an ordinary old woman like her. Everyone in her line had to go through a metal detector before giving their tickets to the boarding officer. When it was her turn, the alarm went off, which scared the woman and grabbed everyone's attention. Edith was very embarrassed, especially when the security officer told her to leave the line and get scanned. The older woman stood there with her arms open wide. The guards checked to see if she was carrying anything illegal. As the line stopped moving, the whispers got louder. A young woman finally said, "Had to be the old woman, huh?" The guard then found out what had caused the alarm to go off. Edith's keys were in her socks. She always put her keys in her socks when she was leaving the house, whether she was going to the market or out of the city. Everyone started laughing and making fun of the older woman when they saw her take off her old shoes so the security guard could get the keys from her socks. Miss Marshall was ashamed and she felt like she had no choice but to stand with her head down. She had never been through anything like this. It was just a key. What is the problem? She was finally able to go to the counter where her ticket was checked. The inspector looked at her and the piece of paper she had given him. He checked her and asked, "Are you really Edith Marshall? Is this ticket really yours?" She said, "Yes," and then showed the ticket officer her ID. The officer called the manager. The manager took a suspicious look at the ticket and then at the old woman. Once again, Miss Marshall was holding up the line. There were more giggles. Some of the women crossed their arms and tapped their feet. The older woman didn't know why this was happening and could only hope the officers would believe her. "Okay, you can get on, but you are in the wrong line. This is for executive class passengers. Your line is there for first class passengers," he said. The woman in front of her was shocked. What's happening? How does such a poor person have a luxury suite? Something isn't right here. Look at her shoes, someone else said. Miss Edith was ashamed of the remarks. She apologized to the manager and went to the other line, which was much shorter and had even better dressed people. She showed her ticket to the officer and she was allowed to get on the ship. She didn't like how people looked at her, like she was bad, but she couldn't do anything about it. No one seemed to even notice that she was there. It was as if she had never been there. The truth is that no one could have guessed what would happen. Miss Marshall had never seen a ship that big. How was it that something so big could float? She was talking to herself quietly, but she had good reason to trust the cruise ship and the people who ran it. She was shocked and didn't know what to do next. Where were the premium suite rooms? She walked up to a crew member who was standing in the halls and was wearing a uniform. When he saw the older woman wearing simple clothes and old shoes, he thought she was just a low-income tourist who was just looking around. The crew member turned to her and said, "Ma'am, these suites are only for first-class travelers." He then turned his attention to a handsome, well-dressed guy who also needed his help. Miss Marshall chose to stay behind a group of people who walked in front of her. They appeared to know where they were going. She must have been the only person there who had never been on a cruise. She was poor and looked poor, and she was an older woman, which made it even clearer that no one wanted to be around her. A young crew member finally saw that the old woman looked nervous and offered to help her with her bags. "I don't know where I belong, young man," she said in a humble way. "This ship is very big." The young man asked to see her ticket, and when she gave it to him, he was shocked. He hadn't thought that she would be staying in a premium room. But the young man didn't waste much time passing judgment before picking up Miss Marshall's bags and brought her to her room. The older woman felt better now. She was no longer alone, and she was almost there. Everything looked like it was going according to plan. She walked with the young man until they got to a beautiful, rich place full of other travelers. "According to your ticket, you belong here. Now you can follow this line, okay?" he said as he set her bags down on the ground. Before he went to do other things, he told her, "I'll be right back to help you." The problem was that the bags were left on the floor, blocking everyone's walkway. A man who looked like he was worth $1 million felt uncomfortable and decided to say something. "That's enough for me. I pay a lot of money to stay somewhere nice and quiet, and I have to deal with this," he told her. "Ma'am, why don't you find your cabin and leave us alone?" She tried to argue back by saying, "But my ticket is for this very sector, sir." The man just shook his head and said it couldn't be true. When the crew member came back, he saw the mess that had been made. He quickly took Miss Marshall's ticket and showed it to him to show that she was telling the truth. "I can't believe we've gotten to this point. When did this kind of trip become available to ordinary citizens of this country?" These words shocked Miss Edith so much that she couldn't say anything. She felt like crying. She didn't know why that man and others were upset just because she was there. Some people didn't like what the man said, because they thought it was rude to talk that way to older women. Others, on the other hand, agreed with the man and thought it was silly to have those types of people in the first class of a cruise ship. I'm curious. How did that old woman get here? Was it kindness? Did she win the lottery? Raffles are fun for poor people, right? Asked one person. Miss Marshall was upset by this. She put her hands on her face because she couldn't hold back her tears. Finally, a young woman saw what the man was doing to the old woman and came to her defense. "Don't you see that she has just as much right to be here as you do? Aren't you embarrassed to talk to an older woman that way? If she was your mother, would you talk to her that way?" All at once, everyone began to talk. All the rich people started arguing. The older woman put her bags in the corner because she was tired and felt like she doesn't belong there. She had given up trying to find her room. Before helping the older woman, the young crew member who had just helped her told everyone to calm down. Edith's voice was weak and hard to understand. Finally, the young man helped her sit down in a sofa in the hallway. At that time, she dropped an old photo on the floor. The young man quickly moved to get her. He looked at the picture and saw that there was a boy in it. He then gave it back to her. "This must mean a lot to you, madam. It wasn't in your bag or wallet. It was in your pocket." Miss Marshall took the picture back, looked at it with love, touched the face on it, then smiled for the first time since she got to the port in Miami. "This is my son, right here. He's the captain. The boy in the picture is in charge of this cruise ship today." When they heard this, everyone stopped arguing. All of a sudden, they were drawn to the story coming from this old woman, who didn't have nice shoes or clothes, but was the mother of the most important man on the ship. She then started a story without taking her eyes off the picture. Miss Marshall grew up in the South, in a low-income family. Her parents had a small ranch, and it kept them from going hungry when times were hard. Edith was the oldest of 3 kids, and she was in charge of how they were raised. Lily was the youngest, and she was in bad health. Edith couldn't remember how many times she had to stay home to take care of her while her mother worked in the fields. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Edith's father had to join the military for a few months later. He was sent to France to fight, and he never came back. But before he left the country, he gave his oldest daughter a golden pendant which belonged to his grandma. He made Edith agree to keep this piece of tradition until he comes back as a hero. But the man came back in a coffin with a flag on it, so Edith couldn't give him the pendant. After this terrible thing happened, the family changed forever. Edith's mother stayed a widow until the day she died. She always missed her husband. At age 27, Edith thought she would never get married, but at the same time, she met Walter, a good-looking, hard-working man in his 30s, who was a really good man. Edith hadn't been in many relationships, but she thought Walter was the one who had been waiting for her. He was really good with her. A year after they first met, they began making plans to get married, but another tragedy would turn Edith's life upside down. Edith thought Lily had the flu when she got sick one winter, but the girl's health didn't get any better, and she seems to be getting weaker every day. When Walter finally got a doctor from the nearest town to come and look at her, they found out that Lily had pneumonia. Walter, when offered to drive the girl in his truck to a hospital in the city, as soon as Lily got there, she was put into urgent care. Walter also started to feel tired and was having trouble breathing just 2 days after. When he went to the doctor, he found out that he too had caught the disease. Possibly while traveling with his sister-in-law, Lily fell to her illness one morning, while Walter fought to stay alive as long as he could. He eventually died. Now there was only Edith and her mother left. When Edith got sick, they were both still depressed about the death. She quickly found out she was going to have a child. She wanted to be happy so much, but she didn't know what she could do. Edith didn't have much real happiness after her son was born. Alzheimer's disease had finally been discovered in her mother. She had just forgotten things sometimes. At other times, she was angry and blamed Edith for them living in poverty and being left alone. Ken, Edith's son, was growing up strong and healthy, just like his father. However, his grandma, who was crying and getting angry more and more often, was a threat to his safety. Edith was having a terrible time living with her mother, so she made the hardest and most heartbreaking decision of her life. She couldn't leave her mother to an unhappy and lonely old age, so she gave Ken to a young farming couple who couldn't have children and had a lot of money and would give Ken a safe and fulfilling life that she could never give him. Leaving the boy with him was like losing an arm, but she had no choice. Sometime after, the woman even went back to find the farmer couple, but they had sold their land and moved to another country. Edith was never able to find the boy because she didn't have the right tools, and it was hard to even make a phone call at that time. She blamed herself for her decisions and never stopped looking for someone who might know something. Every night, she just hoped that he would be okay and would forgive her. Edith just recently found out what had happened to Ken. She got help from a non-profit organization to finish the major screening that led to the result. Ken was now the captain of the same expensive cruise ship she was on, so she could be as close to her son as possible. The organization helped her raise money for a premium suite ticket. She had been waiting for this moment for decades, and now she stood in the hallway of the ship, surrounded by chaos. I still don't know if I can meet him, or what meeting him will be like. But at least I know where he is, and what happened to him. That's all I want, Edith said. I can die now. Everyone around her was quiet, as they hung on her every word. Some said they were sorry for what they said. A lot of people were crying. Some people had even been thinking about their own lives up to this point. But no one could ignore what the older woman with worn shoes had to say. She was so caught up in her feelings, she didn't notice the young crew member who helped her get from the hallway to the room where the cruise control was. Not long after, a word came over the ship's loudspeakers. Travelers, please give me a minute of your time. Ken Marshall is your captain. Even though our cruise ship hasn't left the port yet, I hope the next few days at sea will help change your lives. We never move in one direction. It's a dangerous road with big waves and severe weather. Because of this, it's important to be well balanced, have a strong body, and know what you're doing. I want to say that we don't always have good times in our lives. There will be problems along the way. Just like there are waves in the ocean. If we never mess up, we'll never know the joy of being forgiven. And if we can forgive, there's no reason to be angry with anyone else. I have one more thing to say as the captain of the ship. My mother is on this ship with me, and all of you. She is my real mother. I could never tell her this, so I'll say it now. I don't hold a grudge against anyone or anything. Not a single thing. I already forgave you a long time ago. What you did saved me, and I've always loved you, even before I met you." When Captain Ken spoke, some of the passengers started to cry. Clapping could be heard in every room and public area of the cruise ship. Miss Edith had tears coming out of her eyes. Soon a tall man with grey hair and a sailor's uniform walked into the ship's suite hall. Edith finally got to see her son after more than 45 years. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to handle it, but King quickly hugged her. Now they were both crying tears of happiness as people cheered. Edith took the pendant that her father had worn and given it to her son. It was the family's last piece of history. King gave Miss Edith one last hug and said, "I knew you would never give up on me. Thanks a lot for finding me."